I have made a lot of deliveries in my life, and remember, almost none of them. That is not the usual way a man describes his profession, I know, but it is the honest one. 42 years of breathing, approximately 32 of them conscious, and of those 32 I can account for roughly 21 with any confidence. The other 11 live behind a wall of gray static that the medics at Alvin Station called post-collapse dissociative fugue, and that I call the blank. It does not hurt. It is simply not there. Like a room in a house you grew up in, and you remember the hallway, and you remember the kitchen. And then there is a door that does not open, and you stopped trying to open it years ago because nothing was on the other side except the sound of a ship breaking apart in deep space, and a single word in a language you do not recognize. The word is 2 syllables. It has a soft catch in the middle, like a grace note in music, like the word was designed to stumble slightly and then recover. I have said it to 3 different linguists. None of them could place it in any known language family. The first one told me it might be a phonetic artifact, a syllable cluster my brain had assembled from fragments of other words and elevated to meaningfulness, because the human mind does not tolerate a complete absence of meaning. The second one told me it was consistent with a set of deep-frequency consonant pairings found in 3 or 4 languages spoken by non-human species in the outer rim, but she could not narrow it further without more context. The third one told me he had no idea and charged me 400 credits for the consultation. After that, I stopped trying to explain the word and started just keeping it. You do that, eventually. You find the shape of the thing you cannot account for, and you build your life around the edges of it. The blank is 11 years of my life, and a word in a language I do not recognize, and the sound, very far away, dim and distorted by whatever distance exists between memory and the static that ate it, of a ship breaking apart. I have never gone looking for the wreck. I do not know what I would find. I arrived at Kesavar Station on the 14th day of the Vaer diplomatic season. I did not know it was the Vaer diplomatic season. I did not know much about the Vaer. I knew they were tall, that their skin came in ranges of silver and ash and pale gray blue, that their eyes were amber or gold, and that they did not blink the way humans blink. The membrane comes from the side, not from above, a slow lateral slide that takes a moment to understand the first time you see it, and that they had a political structure complicated enough that the Union Courier Service paid a hazard bonus just for delivering inside their jurisdiction. I knew that because I had done it 12 times since coming back online at Alvin, and the bonus had kept my ship, the Candor, in fuel and basic repair. Kesavar Station was not technically Vaer jurisdiction. It was a neutral transit hub, owned and operated by the Kel Consortium, orbiting a dead moon called Tessavar 7 at the edge of the Vaer succession's oldest territorial claim. The station was older than the consortium's current management structure, which meant it had the particular smell of institutional age, recycled air, composite flooring worn to a low shine, light panels that had been replaced at different intervals over decades, and so produced a subtly uneven quality of illumination throughout the corridors, brighter here, dimmer there, the whole thing feeling slightly like a face that has healed from something. There was also, from my first moment in the docking ring, a sweet and faintly medicinal undertone in the air that I did not recognize. It was not unpleasant. It reminded me of dried flowers, or of something burned slowly at a low heat. I thought the air filters were malfunctioning. I learned later that it was an incense the Vaer burned during grief observances. My delivery was a sealed diplomatic packet for a Kel Consortium attaché named Duras, a small, worried-looking man who met me at the docking collar with a datapad already extended and took the packet without making eye contact with me once. He was distracted. He was distracted the way a man is distracted when the people who have taken over his building are making him very aware that they could make things considerably worse than they currently are, and that they are exercising enormous restraint in not doing so. The whole station had that quality. There were Vaer attendants everywhere, tall figures in layered gray robes moving through the corridors, with the particular focused silence of people who are managing something difficult and do not want anyone to notice. The consortium staff had pressed themselves to the outer walls, keeping their eyes down, making themselves thin. It had the feeling of a place that had been gently but thoroughly taken over, not by force, but by gravity, the way a large and dignified presence takes over a room simply by being in it. I signed the receipt, collected my fee, and went looking for a meal. The main corridor ran the length of the station in a long, gentle curve, with transit lounges set into its inner wall at intervals. Most lounges were occupied by Vaer delegations, and the ones that were not had consortium staff in them who looked like they would rather be elsewhere. I found an open food counter at the far end and bought a ration pack and a cup of something hot and dark that the vendor promised was analogous to coffee. It was not analogous to coffee. It was closer to charcoal dissolved in warm water, with a secondary flavor that I could not identify, but that sat in the back of the throat for several minutes afterward. I drank it anyway and looked for somewhere to sit. The transit corridor, beyond the food counter, was quieter. Most of the Vaer had gathered toward the central hub, where some kind of formal proceeding seemed to be underway. I could hear the low resonance of Vaer ceremonial speech, a structured cadence that carried even through two sets of corridor walls. The far end of the corridor was nearly empty. One of the lounge alcoves had been cleared of its usual occupants and marked off with a thin white privacy screen, the kind you see outside medical bays or private consultation rooms. I assumed it was reserved and kept walking. Then I saw her. She was sitting outside the screen, not behind it, sitting on the plain bench that ran along the corridor wall, the way anyone might sit while waiting for a connecting transport, except that no one waiting for a connecting transport sits quite like that. She was very still. She was alone. Her attendants, I counted 3 of them, were clustered at the far end of the alcove entrance, speaking quietly among themselves with the strained look of people who have been told to give their principal space and are finding it considerably difficult. She was tall, even seated. The robes she wore were darker than those of the other Vaer I had seen throughout the station, not gray but something between charcoal and black, with a fine border of silver thread at the cuffs and collar that caught the overhead light when she breathed. Her hair was copper bright, which startled me. I had not expected that color on a Vaer. It was braided and coiled at the base of her neck with the precision of something formal, and it was shot through with threads of silver that I realized, looking longer, were not decorative but natural, the silver growing from her roots outward, very fine, a sign of something I did not then have the language to name. Her hands were folded in her lap with the completeness of a person who has learned to hold herself still over a very long time. Her eyes were open, amber and calm, looking at the middle distance of the corridor wall opposite with an expression that was not sadness exactly. It was older than sadness. It was what sadness leaves behind when it has been living in a place for so long it becomes the architecture. I did not mean to sit near her. I want to be clear about that. There was nowhere else to sit that wasn't already occupied or otherwise unavailable, and I was tired from the docking procedures and the meeting with Duras, and my not coffee was still hot, and I just wanted to be off my feet for 20 minutes before I went back to the candor and started the return manifest. So I sat on the far end of the same bench, a distance that I judged to be respectful, far enough to be clearly separate, close enough that I wasn't hovering in the open corridor, and opened my ration pack and ate. One of the attendants appeared at my elbow almost immediately. She was young, the youngest of the 3, and she spoke to me first in Vaer, which I do not speak, and then in Trade Common, which I do. "This area is reserved," she said, "for the Empress." I looked down the bench at the woman sitting there. I looked at the attendant. "I'm just eating," I said. I'm not bothering her. The Empress requires privacy. I'm not talking to her. I'm eating a ration pack. The attendant looked at me with the expression of someone who has clearly explained a simple rule and cannot understand why it is not being followed. This area is a public corridor on a consortium transit station, I said, not unkindly. I'm a paying customer with a valid docking permit. I'll be out of your way in 20 minutes. She went back to confer with the others. I ate my ration pack. It was better than the not coffee, which is a low bar, but it cleared it. The woman on the bench, the Empress, had not moved or looked at me during any of this. She continued to look at the corridor wall. Her hands continued to sit in her lap. The attendants watched me with varying degrees of suspicion and discomfort. I finished my ration pack, crumpled the wrapper and pocketed it because there was no waste receptacle within reach, and sat with my not coffee and looked at the station ceiling, which was plain white composite with light panels set at approximately 3-meter intervals, utterly unremarkable. After a while she said, in trade common that was unaccented and very precise, "You may go." "I know," I said. "I'll go when I'm done." A long pause, the kind of pause that has shape and weight to it. "Most beings go when they are told," she said. "Most beings haven't been living out of a 12-meter courier ship for 3 years," I said. "My standards for comfortable seating have declined significantly. This bench is an improvement." Another pause, shorter this time. "You are human," she said. It was not a question. "Aldrin Cass," I said. "Union Courier Service, docked at berth 7. I delivered a packet to your consortium attaché about an hour ago." She said nothing. I finished my drink. Eventually I stood, nodded in her direction in the way that seemed right, not a bow, not a wave, something in between, the kind of acknowledgement you make to someone you have no relationship with but whose presence you are aware of, and walked back toward the docking ring. I did not think about her again that evening. I ran my maintenance checks, filed my return manifest, replaced a seal on the fuel coupling that had been leaking very slowly for 2 weeks, and went to sleep in the pilot bunk with the Cander's recycling systems making their familiar low cycling sound, which I have long since stopped noticing. In the morning, I went back to the food counter because the Cander's galley was out of everything except protein bars, and protein bars at 6 in the morning are a specific kind of misery that I have been unable to make peace within 11 years of trying. I bought another ration pack and another cup of the not coffee and walked back down the corridor, and I told myself I was walking that way because the food counter was at that end and not for any other reason. She was there again. Same bench, same stillness, same folded hands, same amber eyes on the same point of the corridor wall. The attendants were there too, slightly further away this time. They had repositioned to give her more space, or perhaps they had decided I was not worth the energy of close surveillance, and one of them began to move toward me as I came down the corridor, but the Empress said something short and quiet in Vaer, and the attendant stopped and stayed put. I sat on the far end of the bench. I opened my ration pack. "You came back," she said after a while. "The food counter is at this end of the corridor. There is another food counter near the docking ring." "I know. I found it on the station directory last night. They don't have the hot drink." She was quiet for a moment. "You prefer the hot drink?" "No," I said. "It's terrible, but I've become attached to it. I think it might be growing on me." The pause this time was different. It had a texture to it, like something that is considering whether to move and has not yet decided. "It is called Vaer moth," she said. "We brew it from dried hull moss that grows on the outer skin of long-range vessels. It is not intended for human consumption. The hull moss extract is mildly psychoactive in most species other than Vaer." "That explains a great deal," I said. I thought the ceiling was more interesting than usual. Something happened at the corner of her mouth. Not a smile. The idea of a smile observed from a careful distance through glass. We sat in silence. I ate. She looked at the wall. The attendants watched from their position. After a while I finished, stood, and looked down the corridor toward the food counter. "Same time tomorrow," I said. She did not answer. I took that as neither a yes nor a no and walked back to the docking ring. I stopped at birth administration on the way and filed for a 3-day birth extension. I told the clerk it was a mechanical issue. The coolant line genuinely did need work. That was not the reason for the extension. I went back the next morning and the morning after. I said very little on those days. She said very little back. I had learned, by the third morning, something about the quality of her silence. That it was not the silence of someone who did not want to speak, but the silence of someone who had been required to speak correctly for so long that speaking without a requirement had become difficult. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from being responsible for a great deal at all times, and I have seen it in certain people, older soldiers, station commanders, anyone who has held weight for long enough that the weight has become load-bearing in their structure. It was in her. The composure was real, but it was also work. I brought 2 cups of the Vaer on the 4th morning, set one at a careful distance on the bench beside her, and sat with my own. She looked at the cup for a long moment. Then she picked it up with both hands and held it the way you hold something that has warmth when you are very cold and the warmth matters more than the object. She did not drink it. I did not mention it. "What does a courier deliver?" she said on the 5th morning, looking at the corridor wall with the cup still in her hands. "That brings him to Kesavar station in the diplomatic season. Sealed packet for Duras at the consortium office. That is a half-day's work." "It is." "You have been here 5 days." "I have." The side membrane blinks slow and deliberate. "Why?" I thought about it honestly. I did not want to give her a performance. "I'm not sure," I said. "I think you looked like you needed someone to sit nearby who wasn't going to make demands of you, who wasn't going to need anything." The amber eyes moved from the corridor wall to my face. It was the first time she had looked directly at me, not past me, not at the general area I occupied, but at me specifically. Her eyes were extraordinary up close. Not just amber, but layered, the color shifting at the edges toward something almost copper, almost gold, with the side membrane resting at the outer corner, giving them a quality that was not human but was, in some way I could not have explained to anyone, legible. I understood what they were saying even though I had no vocabulary for it. "That is a strange thing for a stranger to notice," she said. "I've had people sit with me that way," I said. "During bad years, it helped more than the people who tried to fix things." She held my gaze for another moment. Then she looked back at the wall. "The diplomatic season at Kesavar runs 11 days, she said. "The station observance is one of grief. 31 years ago, the Kesavar collapse destroyed 7 Vaer vessels and a research outpost on the surface of Kesavar 7. Among those lost was," she stopped. The stillness came back, deeper than before, the way water goes still when something beneath it stops moving. "Among those lost was my bonded mate." I did not say anything. "He was a researcher," she said after a moment. "He was studying the deep-frequency emissions from Kesavar 7, anomalous radiation readings that did not conform to the expected profile of a geologically dead body. He had been posted here for 6 months at the time of the collapse. I was to join him in 8 more weeks." She paused. "The collapse happened on the 44th day before my scheduled arrival." I sat with that, the arithmetic of it, 8 weeks away and then nothing. 31 years is a long time to come back to this station, I said finally. "I do not come back," she said. "I have never stopped." I understood then what the diplomatic season was, and what the incense was, and why her attendants moved the way they moved and looked at the world with the careful, steady attention of people who have been managing grief that is not their own for a very long time. I understood that this woman had been making this journey every year for 3 decades, and that the robes were not diplomatic dress, and that the stillness was not composure in the ordinary sense, but a kind of grief that has been lived with so long that it has replaced bone. "I'm sorry," I said, not as a filler, not as the performed thing that the word usually is, as the plain thing, the only thing I actually had to offer. She looked at me. The layered amber was very steady. "Most beings who say that are performing it," she said. "You are not performing it." "No." We sat. The incense drifted from somewhere further inside the station. The light panel above us had the slightly cooler tone of a replacement unit that was newer than its neighbors. After a long while she said, "Vaereth." Her voice shifted on the word, dropped to something lower, the way a name sounds when it is also a reclamation, when you are reminding yourself that you exist outside the role. "That is my name, not the Empress. Vaereth." "Aldrin," I said, "not the courier, Aldrin." The corner of her mouth moved again. This time it moved further than it had before and held. On the 6th morning, she was not on the bench. The alcove was empty, the privacy screen removed, the corridor simply a corridor. I stood there for a moment with my ration pack and my Wehrmacht, feeling the specific kind of foolishness you feel when you have been telling yourself you are doing something for a practical reason, and the practical reason turns out not to be there. And then I went back toward the food counter to find somewhere else to sit. One of the attendants was waiting near the counter, the younger one. She looked at me with an expression that had changed considerably from its earlier suspicion into something more careful and harder to read. "The Empress requests your presence," she said. "If you are willing." The room she was in was a standard consortium meeting alcove, not large, not grand, the kind of room that exists to serve a function and makes no claim beyond that. Someone had cleared its conference table and brought in low Vaer-style seating, cushioned platforms close to the floor that were more comfortable than they looked, arranged facing each other with a low table between. There was a window I had not seen on the station before. Kesevar's outer windows were few, and most faced the approach lanes rather than the moon, and this one looked directly down at Kesevar 7. The dead moon hung in the dark below, brown and gray and motionless, marked with the long parallel scars that the geologists at Alvin had told me, when I once asked, were the result of a catastrophic tectonic event several million years prior. It looked like something that had survived by refusing to be anything other than what it was, a dead thing that was still there. Vaereth was standing at the window. She did not turn when I came in. The attendant withdrew and closed the door behind her, and suddenly the room was very quiet. I stood for a moment, orienting myself, and then crossed to stand near the window, not beside her, but at an angle where I could see her face reflected in the glass if I looked. The reflection was faint. Her expression in it was softer than anything I had seen her show in the corridor. "I thought about what you said," she said, "about sitting nearby when someone needs it. It's a very small thing." "Yes," she said, "that is what I thought about." She turned from the window and gestured at the low seating, and I sat, and she sat across from me, and the amber eyes in the full light of the room were very direct. "I want to ask you something." "Go ahead." "You said you have had bad years. What were they?" So I told her about the blank, not the clipped professional version, the one I gave to consortium administrators who needed to know about the gap in my medical records, or the one I gave to clients who sometimes asked why I had no employment history before age 31. I told her the real one, the wall of static, the door I had stopped trying to open, the single word in a language I did not recognize that lived on the other side, the only thing I had carried out of 11 years of nothing. She listened without interrupting. She listened the way a person listens who is not assembling a response or waiting for their turn to speak, but actually receiving what is being said. When I finished, she sat with it for a moment, not rushing to fill the space. "What is the word?" she said. "I don't know how to render it in trade common. It sounds like," I tried to reproduce it, the way I had with the three linguists and the medics at Alvin and occasionally with myself in the pilot bunk at 3 in the morning. The word came out the way it always did, close, approximately shaped, but missing something I could never identify. 2 syllables, a soft sound. The stumble on the second syllable that felt intentional, like a piece of a music, like the word had been designed with imprecision as a feature. Vareth had gone very still. Not the architectural stillness of grief, a different kind entirely. The stillness of a creature that has heard a sound it did not expect and has frozen in order not to disturb it. The way you go motionless when a bird lands very close, and you do not want to be the thing that makes it leave. "Say it again," she said, very quietly. I said it again. The same attempt, the same result, the same soft catch on the second syllable, the same particular shape of the stumble that I had never been able to replicate differently no matter how many times I tried. Vareth's hands were pressed flat on her knees. The copper braid was very still against her shoulder. Her eyes had gone wide, the copper gold layering visible all the way around the amber, and the side membrane was motionless at the corner. "Where did you hear that word?" she said. "I don't know. It's from the blank. It's the only thing I carried out of it." That word, her voice had dropped to something I had to lean forward slightly to catch clearly, is not trade common. It is not a trade language of any kind. It is a Vaer bonding word. In the paired register, the private language that a bonded pair builds between themselves, it is not taught to others. It is not recorded in any archive or linguistic database. It can only be learned from one source. She stood. She crossed the space between us in 2 steps and crouched in front of me where I sat, and the amber eyes were very close, and they were doing the thing I would later understand was the Vaer expression of recognition. A dilating and contracting, very slight, the membrane moving, the eyes cycling through something that had no human analog but that the pre-language part of my brain read clearly. "There is a test," she said, "for bond resonance. It is a genetic analysis combined with a frequency measurement. It is the method the Vaer use to confirm the identity of a bonded pair when conventional identification has failed, in cases of injury, long absence, disputed succession. It has never been used in circumstances like these. There is no precedent." The voice was very steady and very controlled. The hands resting on her knees were not. "I need to ask if you will allow it." I looked at her. I thought about the wall and the door and the word. I thought about 11 lost years and the single thing that had come through them intact. "Run it," I said. She called for her court physician. Her voice doing so was different from any voice I had heard her use before, stripped of its careful measurement, urgent in a way she was not trying to contain. The physician arrived within 2 minutes. He was a tall, older Vaer male with silver at the temples, and the bearing of someone who has been trusted with important things for a long time, and has learned to wear that trust without showing its weight. He looked at me with an expression that catalogued and assessed, and withheld judgment all at once. The test took 40 minutes. It involved 3 separate instruments I had never encountered before. The first was a genetic sequence reader applied to the back of my hand, flat and warm, that hummed very quietly for 7 minutes while it worked. The second was a frequency resonance pad pressed to the base of my skull, which I felt not as pressure but as something deeper, a vibration that lived below the threshold of hearing. The third was a chromatic analysis of my eyes. I was asked to look at a series of lights, 7 of them in sequence, for what the physician said was 6 minutes but felt longer, while the equipment catalogued something in the structure of my iris that I had not known was there to catalog. The physician read the results. He read them twice. He read them a 3rd time. Then he spoke to Vareth in Vaer, rapid and very low, his voice trained to carry privately even in this small room. I watched Vareth's face while he spoke. She did not look at me. She looked at the results on his scanner screen, and her expression was the most carefully constructed thing I had ever seen. A person holding themselves precisely upright, because to stop would be to fall, and she was not yet certain how far the fall would go or what would be left at the bottom. The physician fell silent. She looked at me. "The bond resonance matches at 99.7%, she said. "The genetic sequence confirms a biological continuity, an identity that should not exist." She drew a breath, very controlled. There was a Vaer preservation archive built beneath the Kesavar research outpost. A subsurface vault, designed to endure conditions that would destroy surface structures, constructed as a redundancy, a last resort, a thing that was meant to survive what nothing else did. It was believed destroyed in the collapse. The records of the collapse assumed total destruction. The data the archive contained included complete cellular records of every person stationed at the outpost. Her voice remained level. My mate's records were among them. I sat very still. "We believe the archive survived," she said. "We believe that at some point during the 11 years you cannot account for, or possibly during the collapse itself, in the immediate aftermath of the event, in a way the records never captured, the archive's emergency systems engaged." The Vaer archive systems include a reconstitution protocol. It was theoretical. It was designed in the early years of deep space exploration, when the prospect of a collapse destroying a bonded pair together was considered the most catastrophic outcome the succession could face. The protocol has never been activated. It was never expected to be needed. She paused. It was designed so that what was in the archive, if the archive survived, could be given back. "What does reconstitution mean?" I said. I already understood. I needed to hear it said. "It means that what was in the archive," she said, "is standing in front of me now. Reconstituted across 3 decades in a human body, because the base template for biological reconstitution that the archive carried, because the person whose cellular records were stored there," she stopped, started again with visible effort, "because my mate was human." I sat with that for a very long time. The physician had stepped back to the edge of the room. Vareth's attendants were at the doorway, their faces doing many things at once. The dead moon turned in the window below us, very slowly, as it had been turning for millions of years. "I don't remember you," I said at last. "I know. I don't remember any of it, this station, the research outpost, whatever came before." I looked at the window, not at her. "I have a word and a wall and 11 years of static." "I know." Her voice was steady, entirely steady. Only her hands on her knees were not. Reconstitution would not have preserved memory. The archive was cellular and genetic and frequency-based, not neural. What you had before, she closed her eyes briefly, opened them. What you had was a lifetime, 30 years and more of living, a bonded pairs language built between 2 people across years of learning each other. Memories that existed only in the pattern of a mind which no archive ever learned to hold. She looked at me directly. "It is not there. I am not asking you to pretend otherwise. I know it is not there." "Then what are you looking at me like that for?" I said softly. She held my gaze without flinching. "Because you are here," she said. "After 31 years of coming back to this corridor, after 31 years of sitting on that bench because standing on it is the only way I know to stand near him, you are here. And you sat on the bench without being asked. And you came back the next morning and the morning after. And you brought me Vermoth and you said I'm sorry like it was the only thing you had and like that was enough." She stopped. Her chin came up barely, very slightly, but I saw it. "And you were carrying a word in a paired register out of 11 years of silence. A word that only one person ever taught to any being in this galaxy." She was quiet for a moment. "I am looking at you like that because I would very much like not to stop. There is a particular kind of moment that arrives once or twice in a life. If you are very lucky, or perhaps very unlucky, or perhaps simply very much alive, where the logical structures you use to navigate the world become simply inapplicable. Where you are looking at something that has no reasonable category, no protocol, no framework, and the only thing available to you is what you actually feel." I had built 11 years of life on logistics, on the knowable, the fillable, the schedulable, on deliveries that had receipts and routes that had maps and ships that had manuals. I had done it deliberately, the way you build a dam, because on the other side of the dam was the blank and the word and the sound of a ship breaking. I looked at this woman, who had been coming to this station for 31 years, who had sat on a bench in a transit corridor, because the bench was as close as she could get to something she had lost here, and who had let me sit beside her because I hadn't asked permission and hadn't needed anything from her, and hadn't filled the silence with performed comfort, who was now sitting in a small room above a dead moon with 31 years of grief and the most careful chin-up I had ever seen, trying very hard not to ask for more than I could give. "The word," I said, "the one I've been saying wrong my whole life." She looked at me. "Will you teach me the right way to say it?" The expression that crossed her face then was not something I can render completely in any language I know. It moved through several things in quick succession: surprise first, then something that was not quite pain, then something that was not quite relief, then something past all of those that existed in a space I do not have words for, the space between a person who has waited for 31 years and the moment when the waiting shifts into something else, into a past tense. She said the word, not as a lesson, not as an instruction. She said it the way you say something you have been holding carefully for a very long time and have finally decided to set down somewhere real. It landed on me like a hand on the shoulder. I said it back. The same soft catch on the second syllable, the same stumble, the same particular imperfection that I had been carrying for 11 years without knowing why I kept it or what it meant. She made a sound very quietly, not quite a word, the shape that a word takes when it has been waiting a long time to be made. The court convened that afternoon. I had not asked for the court. Vaereth's senior advisor, a tall, angular Vaer male named Thessavar, with deep-set gold eyes and the manner of a man who has kept a household running for decades through sheer force of administrative competence, had convened it on his own authority. He arrived at the alcove door with 3 senior court members, the physician, and the expression of a person who has not slept and suspects he is about to receive further reasons not to sleep. He addressed Vaereth in Vaer for a long time. I sat in the corner and watched the room and tried to follow the weight of the conversation without the language. It was not difficult to read. The weight was, "This cannot be what it appears to be." The weight was, "If it is what it appears to be, there is no protocol." The weight was, "Empress, you have not eaten. You have had this stranger in a private room for 4 hours, and we are responsible for you and we do not know what to do." Vaereth listened. She let him finish completely. Then she said something in Vaer that was short and quiet, and had the quality of a door being closed, not unkindly, but finally. Thessavar turned to me. "You understand what the Empress has told you?" "Yes." "And what is it you want from this situation?" I thought about it honestly before I answered. "Nothing," I said. "I'm a courier. I have a delivery schedule I've already pushed back twice. I don't have any claim on anything here." The bond resonance result is a scientific measurement. It tells you something about what happened 31 years ago and 11 years ago. It doesn't tell me who I am. Thessavar's gold eyes held mine with the steadiness of someone reading a text and checking it for inconsistencies. I let him read. After a moment, "Then what are you doing here?" "I sat on a bench," I said. "I ate a ration pack. I didn't talk when talking wasn't needed. That's the full accounting." "That is not an explanation." "It's the only one I have." He looked at Vaereth. She was watching me with the amber eyes level and something in them that she was not hiding. Thessavar exhaled through his nose. A Vaer sound that I had already learned meant approximately the same thing as a man setting down a very heavy object and deciding he will pick it up again later. "The court will require formal verification," he said. comprehensive genetic archival comparison, bond resonance secondary analysis, a complete chronological reconstruction of the archive's survival timeline and reactivation records. This is not a rapid process. Take whatever time you need, I said. You will need to remain at Kesavar Station during the verification period. I'll file a birth extension and reschedule 2 more deliveries. I can manage that from the docking ring. Another exhale. You are very calm, he said. I've been living with a blank decade in my head for 11 years, I said. I've had practice with uncertainty. It's the thing I'm best at. The verification took 9 days. I stayed in a consortium berth throughout, not in the Vaer diplomatic quarters, because I was not yet anything that warranted it, and I did not want to create problems for Vareth to manage. I rescheduled my deliveries. I ran the maintenance on the coolant line. I went to the food counter each morning and bought vermouth, which I had by this point developed a genuine taste for, and I carried 2 cups to whichever corridor or room or alcove Vareth had available that day. The court schedule allowed us perhaps an hour each morning, occasionally 2. It was not always in the same place. Sometimes it was the corridor bench, which felt different now, less the place where someone sat alone in public and more the place where 2 people had begun to establish something. Sometimes it was the room with the window. Once on the 5th day, it was the station's observation gallery, a long curved room with a full viewport over Kesavar 7 that was technically open to all passengers, but that the Vaer attendants managed somehow to be nearly empty whenever Vareth was in it. We talked in those hours in the way that people talk when time is not guaranteed, not carefully exactly, but deliberately, making choices about what to say because there was not space for everything. She told me about the research station as it had been before the collapse, the layout of the observation dome, the particular angle at which the sun caught Kesavar 7's surface in early morning, when the dead moon's gray became, briefly, something almost gold. She told me about the bonding ceremony and what it meant in Vaer terms, not a metaphor but a literal physical entanglement at the genetic and frequency level, the pair becoming resonant in a way that the Vaer understood as permanent, and that their science confirmed. She did not tell me everything. She told me the pieces that rose on their own, the ones that the 31 years had not worn smooth. I told her about Alvin Station, where I had woken up in a medical bay with no identification and no memory, and a courier's license in my pocket that the record said was 6 years old, and that I had absolutely no memory of earning. I told her about the first delivery I could remember making, the client's name, the weight of the packet, the approach to a station I had apparently been to before but that felt entirely new. I told her about the 3 linguists and the word. I told her about the way I had organized the blank into something manageable, a room with a door, a wall with nothing on my side of it, the sound of a ship that I had learned to live with the way you live with any persistent noise by eventually ceasing to hear it. She listened to all of it. She did not rush toward resolution or comfort. She listened the way she had listened from the beginning, with the full weight of her attention. On the 4th day, she taught me 3 more words in the paired register. I said them wrong in the same specific ways each time. A consistent imprecision she did not correct immediately but watched with an expression that was not quite the grief expression, and not quite the warmth expression but something that sat between them, something I did not yet have a name for. On the 5th day, I asked her to tell me what his name had been, the name she had given her mate, in the Vaer custom where the bonded partner holds the beloved's name as a private thing. She was quiet for a long time after I asked. Then she said it, and something happened in my chest that was not memory but was shaped like memory, the silhouette of a thing that had once been there, the outline remaining after the substance was gone. The physician delivered the verification results on the morning of the 9th day. He presented them to the assembled court in the main diplomatic chamber, high-ceilinged, with Vaer formal drapery in dark gray and silver, the succession's grief colors, still hanging from the season's observance. Vareth was seated at the chamber's far end. Thesavar stood at her right. Approximately 20 members of the court were arranged in their formal positions. I was brought in last, after the results had been read aloud in Vaer to the assembled court, and I stood at the chamber's center with my hands at my sides and waited. Thesavar read the summary in trade common, for the record and I suspected for me. Bond resonance, 99.7% match. Genetic sequence, confirmed biological continuity, identity established. Timeline reconstruction, archive activation event consistent with impact and structural collapse occurring 31 years prior, followed by a dormancy period of approximately 20 years, followed by a reconstitution event at a location consistent with the Alvin Transit Corridor, 11 years prior. The archive had drawn on biological resources available in that corridor to complete the process. This was consistent with anomalies in the medical records of an unidentified human patient, admitted to Alvin Station Medical 11 years ago with no identification and no memory. The chamber was very quiet when he finished. He looked at me across the quiet room. The court's formal position is that the verification is conclusive, he said. The court does not know, formally, what it means or what it entails. No precedent exists. I don't have a precedent either, I said. An older senior advisor, a woman who had the bearing of someone who had been doing this for 50 years and was not easily unsettled by anything, spoke in Vaer. Thesavar translated. She says, he does not have the Empress's mate's memories. He does not have their shared history. He is not formally the same person. The court must understand what the Empress intends. I spoke before Vareth could, not to cut her off but because the question had been addressed to the room and I was part of the room. The court is right, I said. I am not who he was. I'm Aldrin Cass. I have a courier's license and a 12-meter ship, and 11 years of life I built from scratch in a medical bay on a station I'd never heard of. I'm not claiming anything that belongs to who he was or to the life she had with him. The chamber waited. I'm saying I sat on a bench in a corridor, I said. I've been coming back to it every morning. I had a word in my head for 11 years that turned out to be the only kind of word it could be. That's what I have. It's not a claim. I don't know what it is. Vareth stood. Every Vaer in the room shifted posture at once, the attention becoming absolute and total, the way gravity becomes absolute when something significant moves within it. She came down from the dais and walked across the chamber floor and stopped in front of me, and she was very tall and very still, and the amber eyes were doing everything. She took my hands in hers. It was the first time she had touched me. Her hands were cool and precise, the fingers long and light against mine, the hold careful and complete. I have one question for you, she said, in a voice that was for me and not for the room. Go ahead. On the 6th morning when I was not on the bench, where did you go? Back to the food counter, I said. I looked for somewhere else to sit. And when my attendant came, I came. She held my gaze. That is all I needed to know, she said. She released my hands, turned to face the court, and in a voice that was for the room and for the record. The court is not asked to determine who he is, she said. That is not the court's determination to make. I know who he is. He is the man who sat on a bench in this corridor on the 44th day of the grief observance because there was nowhere else to sit, and who did not perform anything, and who did not leave when he was asked to. Her voice was completely steady. He is the man who brought me Vermouth for 6 mornings and said I'm sorry like he meant it, and who carried a word for 11 years without knowing why, and who, when I asked him whether he would teach me that word again, properly. Her voice caught, very slightly, and then steadied again. He said he would like to learn it from me, if I would teach him. She looked at me. Aldrin Cass, she said. And then below it in the paired register, the private language, the one that cannot be recorded or replicated or taught, she said the name she had given him. Given me. the name that lived on the other side of the blank. It did not open the door. I had thought in the 9 days of verification about whether it might, whether the right word in the right voice might dissolve the static, whether the name could be a key. The medics at Alvin had told me there was no medical intervention that could recover what the blank contained. I had believed them. I had made my peace with it, the way you make peace with a permanent loss, not gladly, not completely, but functionally, the way you learn to walk with a leg that healed wrong. The peace was real. It was also fragile. The name landed on me in her voice, with the particular inflection of the paired register. And the door did not open, and the 11 years did not come back, and the 30 years before them stayed where they were, unreachable, on the other side of the wall. But something happened, something small and very specific, and more real than anything I had a framework to contain. The name landed on me the way the first word had, that morning in the alcove, not as memory but as frequency, as resonance. The way a string tuned to a pitch will answer when that pitch is played across the room, even without being touched, even without knowing the source of the sound. I said it back. Not the name, not reaching for what I could not reach. Just the word, the first one, the one from behind the door, the only thing I had carried. I said it in the correct register, the private language, with the right shape in my mouth, the way she had taught me the evening before. The chamber was completely still. Vareth looked at me. "That's not wrong," she said, very quietly. "No," I said, "you're a good teacher." The corner of her mouth moved, then the rest of it moved. And then, in front of her court, on Kesevar Station, above a dead moon, on the 44th day of the grief observance, 31 years after the collapse, Vareth smiled. Not the corner of the mouth idea of a smile. The real thing, full and unguarded, the kind a person produces when they have been waiting so long that the moment of arrival has bypassed all their preparation. Kesevar made a sound somewhere between a groan and a sigh that contained the full weight of his career. The senior advisor who had spoken earlier said something in Vaer. Kesevar translated with his eyes briefly closed. She says, "The court yields to the Empress's judgment, as it always has." I spent 11 more days at Kesevar Station. The verification period had formally closed, which meant that the court's official attention moved to the question of what came next, a question I declined to weigh in on, because it was genuinely not my question to answer, and because the most useful thing I could do for Vareth was to not be a problem she had to manage. Kesevar and I reached an understanding of sorts. It was not warm. It was not unfriendly. It was the understanding of two people who have identified a shared interest and are willing to coordinate on that basis. The shared interest was Vareth. On the last morning, I sat on the bench in the transit corridor for the first time without a ration pack or a cup of vermouth, without any object at all. Just the bench and the corridor and the light panels with their slightly varied temperatures. Vareth sat beside me, not at the far end but close. The distance between us changed from what it had been 2 weeks ago into something that did not need negotiation. The incense had been put away. The observance had formally closed the day before in a ceremony I had watched from the back of the diplomatic chamber, a Vaer ritual of structured language and stillness that lasted 3 hours, and that I did not understand and did not need to. The Vaer delegations were departing, and the station was becoming ordinary around us, consortium staff moving freely again, the transit lounges filling with the general noise of passage. "You have deliveries," she said. 3 rescheduled. The candors ready. "There are 2 Vaer diplomatic stations within your standard courier routes," she said. I checked. "I know, the Alvin routes cross Vaer jurisdiction twice. I've made those runs before." She was looking at the corridor in front of us, not at me. The copper braid lay against the dark robe. The silver growing through it caught the overhead light. "If a courier were to file for Vaer diplomatic docking priority," she said, carefully, precisely, the way she said things that mattered. The berth fees would be waived and the scheduling flexibility would increase considerably. That sounds like a very good arrangement for a courier, I said. It is conditional, she said, on the courier filing regular routing manifests through the Empress's personal office. So she knows where the courier is. So the office maintains current routing information for diplomatic coordination. I looked at the corridor and at the window at the far end, where Tessivar 7 was turning its slow, uncommunicative turn in the dark below. A dead moon that was still there. I'd need to learn more Vaer, I said, for the docking protocols. The court's educational archive has language materials. One-on-one lessons or group courses. I imagine, she said, the Empress could teach them personally when the schedule permits. I thought about the word and the door and the 30 years on the other side of it that I would never have back. I thought about the name she had said in the chamber and the frequency of it landing in my chest. I thought about the bench and the Vaer moth and the corridor, and about what it means to carry something for 11 years without knowing why, and about what it means when the reason finally surfaces. I'd like that, I said. She nodded, formal, the way she was formal when she was trying not to be moved, the chin up, the composure held. Then she said in the paired register quietly, the word, the first one, the one from the door. I said it back, the right way, the way she had taught me. She stood. Her attendants materialized from their positions. The diplomatic routine resumed its orbit, and she became the Empress again, composed, deliberate, moving through the station with the gravity of someone who has carried weight for a long time and has learned to carry it gracefully. I walked beside the attendants to the docking ring, and at the collar of berth 7 she stopped. She turned. Aldrin Cass, she said in trade common for whoever was listening, and then below it in the paired register, for me and no one else, the name from the other side of the blank. I stood at the docking collar with the dead moon turning in the dark beyond the station's windows and her looking back at me from the corridor, and I thought about how a word can be a room, and how a room can be a home you did not know you had lost, and how what comes back to you is sometimes not the thing itself, but the shape it left, the place in the world where it used to be still warm, still real, still yours to stand in. I raised one hand. She inclined her head very slightly, the acknowledgement of something that matters and does not need to be made loud to be true. Then I went through the docking collar. The candor smelled the way she always smelled, fuel, worn composite, the specific staleness of a small ship that is mostly lived in. I sat in the pilot's chair and pulled up the rescheduled manifests and the routing files and the return trajectory to the Alvin approach lanes. 3 deliveries, standard routes, 2 crossings through Vaer diplomatic jurisdiction. I filed for the diplomatic docking priority. Then I opened the language learning module I had downloaded from the court's educational archive 4 days ago, went to the first lesson, and started again from the beginning. Outside the viewports, Tessivar Station grew small. Below it, Tessivar 7 kept its slow turn, the dead moon that had survived everything, the dead moon that was still there. I said the word once quietly to the empty cockpit, the right way, the way she had taught me. Then I set the course and flew.